The African Union Summit had just begun. Dozens of African presidents and ministers filled the golden-lit room, buzzing with cameras and whispers. Broadcasters from around the world streamed it live. Suddenly, the lights dimmed slightly. A hush swept across the room. From a large screen, U.S. President Donald Trump appeared via satellite link. His face filled the giant backdrop. His voice thundered through the speakers. Africa needs guidance. We built this world. You either follow our lead or get left behind. There was an awkward silence. Some African leaders glanced at each other. Others looked down, uncomfortable. The weight of history, exploitation, and hidden scars hung over the room like a storm cloud. And then, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, slowly stood up. The camera cut to him. His face was calm, but his eyes, sharp, piercing, unafraid. He didn't rush. He adjusted the microphone, looked at the screen, then looked around the room. Did he just say, guidance? A few nervous chuckles. But Traoré wasn't smiling. He placed his hand firmly on the table and leaned in. We are not your slaves. The entire room froze. Gasps echoed from all corners of the hall. Some leaders turned away. Others sat up straighter. A few blinked, unsure of what they'd just heard. The U.S. translator repeated Traoré's words for global viewers. We are not your slaves. Trump narrowed his eyes on the screen, visibly agitated. He leaned closer to the camera. Excuse me, who do you think you're talking to? But Traoré didn't blink. He turned away from the screen and looked directly at the room. They used to chain us with metal. Now they chain us with contracts, loans, threats. And we pretend not to see. Murmurs filled the room. A few ministers whispered. Some clapped quietly. One delegate from Namibia covered his mouth, his eyes wet. Traoré stepped forward. Brothers and sisters, if we don't speak now, then when? If we don't stand, then why are we here? Trump's voice boomed again through the speakers. You're making a mistake. This will cost you. But Traoré stood still, unshaken. Then let it cost me, but let my people be free. The camera zoomed in, his voice echoed across Africa, and for the first time, millions listening at home began to cry. Across Burkina Faso, crowds had gathered in homes, markets, and open fields to watch the summit. In a dusty village outside Ouagadougou, an old woman named Mariam, who had lived through colonial rule, clutched her radio tighter. Tears streamed silently down her face. He sounds like Sankara, she whispered. In Ghana, a young student watching on a cracked phone clenched his fist. In Nigeria, a taxi driver pulled over, listening to the rebroadcast, eyes wide. Back in the summit hall, a senior diplomat from Senegal slowly stood. Ibrahim, you speak truth. Trump's image flickered. He spoke again, voice louder. If you break away from us, don't come begging later. Remember who gives aid, who builds your roads, who protects your nations. Traoré looked straight at the camera. If a gift comes with a leash, then it was never a gift. At that moment, you could hear a pin drop. In a nearby corner, a journalist from France dropped his pen, frozen in awe. The world was watching a storm begin, not with violence, but with truth. And this truth would burn. In a small village near Dori, Burkina Faso, a 12-year-old boy named Abdoulaye sat cross-legged with his grandfather. They were watching the summit on a dusty old television powered by a solar panel. The screen flickered slightly, but Traoré's voice came through, clear and steady. We are not your slaves. The old man leaned back. He didn't speak. His eyes stared through the screen, remembering chains, French soldiers, the silence of his father's funeral after the village burned. Abdoulaye looked up. Grand-père, why is he the only one speaking? The old man smiled softly. A painful smile. Because others forget. He remembers. Across Africa, that moment wasn't just heard. It landed. In homes, in radios, in broken classrooms with dusty chalkboards. Children stared. Elders wept. Back in the summit room, the camera panned slowly. Trump's face was frozen on the screen, tight-jawed, insulted. But Traoré wasn't looking at him anymore. He looked at the African leaders. They fear we will stand, because they know what happens when we remember our strength. The room stayed silent, but across the continent, hearts began to beat faster. 3 minutes passed. No one else spoke. A Nigerian minister shuffled his papers nervously. The president of Côte d'Ivoire tapped his pen. South Africa's delegate looked down, avoiding eye contact. Traoré stood alone, not physically, but morally. He leaned into the microphone again, slower this time. His voice didn't shake. If we do not challenge this insult, are we not complicit? Silence is not peace. Silence is betrayal. A ripple of shame moved across the room. Suddenly, an unexpected voice broke through. President Samia Suluhu of Tanzania adjusted her mic. Captain Traoré is right. The audience turned. For too long, we've smiled at their loans, while they steal our futures. The tension cracked like glass. A few leaders nodded. But just then, Trump's image cut back in, his voice sharp. You're making a grave mistake. We've invested billions. You owe us. Traoré turned calmly to the screen. What we owe our people is dignity. Outside the summit, global media erupted. Hashtags exploded. Twitter trended. Africa speaks. Protesters gathered in Paris, New York, and Nairobi. But inside the summit hall, the storm hadn't even started. In the dim hallway outside the summit room, a janitor in a faded AU uniform leaned against his mop. His name was Issouf, from Koudougou, Burkina Faso. He'd swept floors for 12 years, never spoken to a president, never even been inside the main hall. But today he'd heard something that made him pause mid-mop. He pressed his ear to the crack of the heavy wooden door. We are not your slaves. Tears welled in his eyes. That voice, he knew it. He'd once cleaned the military camp where Traoré trained. He remembered the boy who read history books during lunch breaks, the one who refused to step over sleeping guards. Issouf didn't know much politics, but he knew one thing. That man hasn't changed. Back inside, Traoré continued. Africa is not asking for permission. We are reclaiming what is already ours, our voice. Trump shifted in his chair on screen. You're destabilizing everything. Traoré looked directly into the lens. No, Mr. Trump, you did that long ago. For the first time, even the camera operators were holding their breath. Inside the summit hall, some leaders clapped lightly, but most remained still. Traoré's bold words lingered in the air like smoke, but not everyone wanted to breathe it in. The president of Senegal leaned toward his mic but paused. The Kenyan Minister of Trade looked uncomfortable. From behind, a low voice muttered, "He'll bring trouble." Traoré noticed. He scanned the room, calmly. You fear the truth because it exposes what we've accepted. Foreign troops on our soil, aid with hidden clause, contracts we don't read because we weren't meant to. The camera caught Donald Trump's smile from the screen. There's always someone who resists progress, Trump said smugly. Traoré didn't even glance at the screen. He turned to the other leaders. We think silence protects us, but it protects them. He stepped back from the microphone. No applause. Just an eerie, heavy stillness. Then someone whispered into a mic, not realizing it was on. They'll never let him leave Addis alive. Millions watching online gasped. Some cried. It wasn't just a speech anymore. It had become a risk. Back at his hotel that night, Traoré stood by the window, staring into the quiet Addis skyline. The summit hall was far behind him, but the war of words still echoed in his ears. He thought of his late mother, a nurse who died working unpaid shifts during the blockade. He remembered the copper mines, the children, the silence. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. His bodyguard opened it cautiously. A hotel staff member entered, trembling. He was just 17. "Sir, my father asked me to give you this," he said, handing Traoré a folded cloth. It was a faded Burkina flag, torn, mended at the corners. He said, "You reminded him of Sankara." Traoré blinked slowly. His hands tightened around the cloth. "What's your name?" "Issa," the boy replied. Traoré smiled for the first time that day. "Issa, if I fall, don't cry for me, just speak." Outside the hotel, unmarked black SUVs circled slowly. Inside, his security tightened. This was no longer about speeches. This was about standing firm when the world wants you to sit down. At 3:47 a.m., Traoré's satellite phone buzzed. He answered. "Hello." A deep American voice came through, slow, firm. "Captain, you made quite a speech today." Silence. "It's not wise to embarrass old allies like that, on a live feed." Traoré didn't flinch. "Who is this?" "You already know." Then a pause, a long, cold pause. "Step down from the summit, apologize publicly, or things will get difficult for your country." "You call that diplomacy?" Traoré replied, eyes burning in the dark. "I call that a warning." Click. The line went dead. Traoré sat on the edge of the bed. He could hear the ceiling fan, his breathing, his pulse. He reached for his notebook and wrote something down. "Let the world know. We are awake now." In a few hours, the summit would resume, and this time, the world would not be ready for what he was about to do next. At sunrise, a sealed envelope was quietly slipped under Captain Traoré's hotel door. It bore no stamp, no signature. Just a gold seal and one word, confidential. He opened it slowly. Inside, a typed note. "You are risking your country's safety. A withdrawal of international aid is being discussed. Think carefully before returning to the summit." He folded the letter. No surprise on his face. Only sorrow. He turned to his aide, a young woman named Aissata, who had followed him since the first coup. "What if they cut us off?" she asked softly. He didn't hesitate. "Then we grow from the soil, or we die with our heads held high." That morning, as the summit resumed, the chairperson looked unsettled. Western media reporters were already in place, their questions sharp and rehearsed. But as Traoré entered, the room grew quiet again. He wore the same uniform, same calm face. But today, he carried a folder. Inside it, papers that could expose decades of African resource deals hidden from public view. Today was no longer about a statement. Today was about proof. As Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the podium, he placed the folder in front of the microphone. No theatrics, just quiet, unshakable confidence. He looked directly at the audience of African presidents and foreign observers. "I bring not a speech today, but documents." He opened the folder. Signed contracts from 2002 to 2024. These show how African resources were traded for crumbs, while billions left our soil. The camera zoomed in as he held up pages. Mining deals, oil agreements, military training contracts. Gold from Niger, uranium from Mali, cocoa from Ghana, timber from Congo, all sold at 1/10 market value, with signatures from leaders sitting in this very room. Gasps. Heads turned. Some stared at their shoes. Others broke into quiet murmurs. Donald Trump appeared back on the summit screen, visibly agitated. "That's not your business. Those deals kept your governments afloat." Traoré raised his voice, not in anger, but in truth. They kept our governments alive, but killed our people slowly. A hush fell. Journalists stopped typing. If this is what guidance looks like, he said, lifting a torn contract, then we have been guided into graves. The room wasn't silent anymore. It was heavy. Suddenly, the president of Cameroon stood. "This is not protocol. You are breaking summit order." Traoré didn't flinch. "I am breaking silence." He stepped away from the microphone and began walking toward the center of the room. "I am not here to shame you," he said, stopping in front of the leaders. "I am here to remind you, we are accountable to our people, not our creditors." The president of Kenya quietly removed his earpiece. Then Chad's foreign minister stood and walked out. Cameras followed. Some called it a protest. Others called it fear. But Traoré, he just stood taller. "Let them walk," he said, turning to the audience. "We've been walking alone for decades." Suddenly, an older delegate from Liberia wiped a tear from his eye. "We have failed our grandchildren." Outside the building, protesters had started gathering. Young Africans holding signs, "We're not slaves. Let Traoré speak. Truth is not treason." Inside the summit hall, the atmosphere was no longer political. It was moral. And the world was listening. That evening, as Traoré returned to his hotel, security stopped him. One of his guards handed him a tablet. "Sir, this was leaked." On the screen was a classified memo, a message between unnamed Western intelligence officers. "If Traoré continues, consider economic pressure. Consider destabilization strategies. Limit media coverage. Neutralize leadership quietly." The room went silent. Aissata covered her mouth. One guard cursed under his breath. But Traoré? He looked away from the screen, unfazed. "They fear words more than war," he said quietly. He walked to the window. Down below, a crowd had formed. Hundreds of young people holding candles and flags, chanting softly, "Africa is rising. We stand with Ibrahim. If I back down now," he whispered, "what do I tell their children tomorrow?" Aissata spoke softly. "They could kill you." He turned. "Then let the last thing I say. Free someone." Back in the summit building, another surprise was brewing. An African president, one no one expected, was about to take the microphone. The next morning, the summit returned to a full house. Global cameras were back on. Social media was flooding with clips of Traoré's speech. The phrase, "We are not your slaves," was now etched into protest banners in Kenya, Mali, Burkina Faso, and beyond. Then something no one expected happened. Paul Kagame, president of Rwanda, often silent in such summits, rose and approached the mic. "I have remained quiet," he began, "but I can no longer pretend." He glanced at Traoré. What this man said was not just brave, it was necessary. Whispers spread across the room like fire. "We have been managed like puppets, traded like tokens, watched like criminals." But today, a younger voice reminded us of something we forgot. He turned to the screen where Trump's face appeared, listening again. "We don't need guidance. We need respect." The crowd slowly began to applaud. For the first time, the applause was real. One by one, African leaders stood, some hesitant, others proud. And in the streets outside, the crowd cheered wildly. Ibrahim Traoré did not smile, but his eyes, they were full of something powerful. Hope. Trump's face darkened on the summit screen. "Enough. You're making a circus out of this." His voice thundered over the room. "You think you can just stand up and break decades of order? You will regret this." Traoré took one step toward the mic, then two. He leaned in, calm, sharp. "Mr. Trump, we have already lived regret. We were born into it." He paused. The regret of selling our own dignity. The regret of silence. The regret of teaching our children to bow before they can stand. He held up a small, wrinkled photograph. It was a Burkina farmer, barefoot, holding his dying child in a dry field. This is what your contracts produced. Not peace, not growth, but hunger and shame. The room went quiet again. So no, we will not apologize. We will not retreat. Not now. He closed the folder, placed the photograph inside, and looked out at the leaders. Because today, we are not asking to be free. We are declaring it. The room exploded in standing applause. Even the cameras shook. Outside, in the streets of Addis, tears flowed like rain. The world had just witnessed a revolution without bullets, only truth. As the summit came to a close, Ibrahim Traoré returned to his seat. But the atmosphere had changed, no longer cold or political. It felt human. Suddenly, a retired general from Mozambique, long known for his silence, stood slowly. He gripped the edge of the podium with both hands. His voice cracked. I saw my brother hanged for resisting colonial command in 1978. He turned toward Traoré. I was a soldier. I obeyed, but I was never free. He paused, breathing through the emotion. Today, Captain, I am free, because of you. He took a single step forward and saluted. A long, heavy moment passed. Then another delegate from Angola stood, then Niger, then Liberia. One by one, they each gave the same salute. By the time the camera panned across the room, even the chairperson had tears in his eyes. In living rooms across the world, people wept. In refugee camps, villagers gathered around small radios. On buses, phones buzzed as young Africans whispered, "He said it. For us." He finally said it. And for the first time in decades, Africa didn't just feel watched. It felt heard. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, RT, France 24. All ran the headline at once. Africa is not your slave. Traoré stuns world in historic speech. Clips from the summit flooded TikTok, Instagram, and WhatsApp in every African language. In Soweto, a grandmother watched with her fist pressed to her chest. In Haiti, a teenage poet wrote, "His words crossed the ocean and woke me up." Even in Washington, White House aides scrambled to respond. But the world wasn't listening to power anymore. They were listening to truth. At midnight, Traoré stood alone on the summit balcony. Below, thousands of youth held candles and waved their nation's flags. From Nigeria to Burkina Faso, they had come without invitation. Just to say, "We believe again." Aissata joined him, eyes wet. "You lit something tonight." Traoré looked down at the crowd. "No, we did." Far away, in a quiet school in Chad, a little boy wrote on the chalkboard, "We are not your slaves. We are our own." And the whole class stood up. Not told, not forced, just proud. 3 days later, Captain Ibrahim Traoré returned home to Ouagadougou. The airport was flooded with young people, old women, barefoot children, students, farmers, everyone. They didn't chant his name. They chanted one word, dignity. As his convoy drove through the streets, flowers were thrown at his windshield. Some cried just seeing his face. In a small hospital where medicine had once run out, a nurse whispered to a patient. He made them listen. Maybe now, help will come. Back in his office, Traoré sat quietly at his desk. He looked at the flag of Burkina Faso. Then he opened a drawer and placed the old photograph inside, the one of the farmer and child. He closed it gently and smiled. Now they know. But this wasn't the end of his journey. It was only the beginning of Africa's voice, spoken not in anger, but in strength, not in revenge, but in remembrance. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if you felt proud to be African, or just proud to be human, then please like this video, subscribe, and drop a comment below with just one word: dignity. Let us flood this video with emotion. Let the world see how truth still touches hearts, how dignity still matters, and how Africa is rising, not in war, but in voice. Your comment could inspire someone. Your like could spread this message. And your subscription, that keeps these stories alive. Thank you for watching. Let truth be your weapon. Let unity be your revolution.